And we're back at home, but not in the studio, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your early Sunday evening here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Well, today is almost 30 years since the release of a film that has had a bit of I don't even know if I'd call it a rediscovery. But this is a movie that at the time of its release was considered to be a clusterfuck disaster. And it's not nearly as bad as its reputation. People realize that now. And it was not as big of a box office disappointment as it appeared to be, if in fact it even was a box office disappointment, but we'll get to that. Released July 28th, 1995, 30 years ago at midnight tonight. For all we know, it was released in a few theaters at midnight the previous night, so technically it could actually be 30 years. But it was the Kevin Reynolds, Kevin Costner, I think their second collaboration, if I'm not mistaken. He did Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, a film that, spoiler alert, is not that good, huge box office hit. But on this day, 1995, saw the release of Waterworld. And Waterworld is a movie that in the still largely pre-internet era, many people I knew were on the internet by the middle of 1995. I was only on the internet when I was at New York University. For whatever reason, didn't have a dial-up modem. It just didn't seem that important at that particular time. Summer of 95 was, I could say it was a difficult time for me, but that's about 25 years of my life, if I'm being completely honest. And it really wasn't that difficult. Seemed difficult. But Waterworld was a movie, even if I was still analog, if I was just keeping up in terms of what movies, and Braveheart was 95, Rob Roy with Liam Neeson, a terrific kind of underrated movie. I'll probably have to talk about that one. First Night with Richard Gere in the same general arena, not great. Fantastic musical score by the late, great Jerry Goldsmith. But I was keeping tabs on Waterworld. And it appeared that the film was in trouble. The reports coming back from the set were, that it was taking way longer. There were cost and budget overruns, which were not necessarily the fault of the filmmaker, Kevin Reynolds, or the star, Kevin Costner, the two Kevins, whatever. The issue was that they decided to film the main scenes of, surprisingly, not really, boats, ships in the world of this story, which is future. They decided to film in an area where there were a lot of potential typhoon events. And they filmed during typhoon season. Now, I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound like a great idea to me. I don't know who said, hey, let's shoot in a typhoon area during typhoon season. Let's make a fucking movie and let's make it as difficult on ourselves as possible and spend $100 million more. So this film, which I'm telling you, it could have been made for 75 to 100, and you can check my work if you read, but with cost overruns, it ended up costing anywhere from 150 to $200 million. So the fact that it ended up grossing between 260 and 265. Now, under normal person circumstances, if the original projected budget, if they were anywhere near the original projected budget of 50 to 75, maybe a little bit more, film is a hit. So I knew there were issues with the set. It kept getting destroyed, and Costner was on it. I saw an interview with Costner when the film was getting ready to be released. And when you talk about somebody who gave zero fucks, Kevin Costner, see him now, Yellowstone, new generation of fans. But Kevin Costner was so frustrated with how things turned out. So they interviewed the director, Kevin Reynolds, and he was very diplomatic. Yeah, we had a lot of production issues. Thanks to the studio for funding us, whatever he says. And Jeanne Tripplehorn, his co-star in the movie, she was asked, if you could rewind the sands of time, would you make this movie again? Knowing the extra time you spent in a leaky raft, more or less, and just waiting for the weather to clear and for the sets to be rebuilt after they were destroyed, I can't even imagine. Jeanne Tripplehorn, trooper as she was, she said, oh, absolutely. It was worth it. Yes, it was difficult, but I'm happy that happy that I did it. Kevin Costner gets asked the same question, and he goes with a straight face, not trying to be funny. He goes, no, because I'm not an idiot. And, you know, in the filtered reality of Hollywood, whether it's 2025, whether it's 1995, whether it's the sanitized days of the 50s and Douglas Sirk melodramas, starring Rock Hudson and Doris Day, you don't usually get that much truth in the Hollywood game. And God bless Kevin Costner. I've always been a fan. I love the guy. That was some truth right there. So you ask, is the movie good? Yeah. And I don't get why the Rotten Tomatoes score was so low. I feel like a lot of critics let the production problems inform their reviews. Because, and you go on YouTube, and I always bring this up, but it bears repeating, and it's an important point. It is a very big part of the social media experience nowadays. There are people whose only job is to watch movies they have not seen. Sometimes they're full of shit, but often you can tell, no, they haven't seen this, and let us know what they think. And Waterworld is one of those movies where if a movie reactor says, well, it says here this, got lousy reviews, they're in shock because to their eyes, hey, it's mostly practical effects. Yeah, no shit. Would have been better off if it could have used CGI and AI to make this, and they wouldn't been out on leaky rafts in the middle of nowhere worrying, are we going to be able to shoot today? Kind of like Jaws, is the shark working? No, the shark is never working, Mr. Dreyfus. But a lot of critics just didn't respond. And if you look at people of today seeing it and discovering the film for the first time, they're saying, this is fantastic. In a similar vein, although not for the same reason, people discovering Arnold Schwarzenegger's Last Action Hero in more recent era. Now, that was a film that actually was a box office bomb. And people totally missed the boat. And younger people watching it now are saying, this is up there with Arnold's best work. I mean, what movie did they watch? And Waterworld is if we could forget the budget, it is a brilliantly mounted production. And this is something that there are movies that just because the production is so confident and so well mounted, it doesn't mean the film is any good. Because from the same year, the single biggest box office bomb, dollar for dollar, in the history of big Hollywood movie making, Cutthroat Island. Rennie Harlan, his wife at the time, and Rennie Harlan, I love the guy. He did Adventures of Ford Fairlane, Die Hard 2, and Cliffhanger with Stallone. But Cutthroat Island cost $100 million, and I don't even think it made as much as $10 million at the box office. That's a film where it looks amazing. The sets look real because they mostly are real. Film sucked, nobody went to see it. Well, Waterworld, they made a good movie, and I just feel like a lot of critics had it out for Costner and Reynolds, and maybe they thought that Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves didn't deserve to become a hit. I have no idea. But I saw this movie opening day with my dad, and I'm pretty sure with my sister. And I really, even though I was a film student at the time, I was in my second year at New York University, I shouldn't have let all the outside noise get to me. But I was stunned by how good the film was and how well it worked. And yeah, Costner's character, the Submariner, not the Submariner, I think he's just known as the Mariner. They should have called him the Submariner. That would have been funny. He's actually pretty good. The way he keeps insisting that dry land doesn't exist. And we don't know, when everybody keeps talking about this mythical dry land, what the fuck does that mean? It means they're all on the water, and we don't know if there is any land anywhere. The whole world, I mean, if you want to say this is a movie promoting green energy before that was a thing, because if we keep going down the path of fossil fuels, and it's not really in the movie, I'm laughing because it's funny thinking about this now. The bad guy in the film, or the other reason why this film is fucking gold, is the villain is played by Dennis Hopper. And Dennis Hopper, his previous film was Speed, where he chews it up to Olympic levels like John Voight in Anaconda in Speed. He plays the villain in this film, and I'm sorry I have to give this part away. His freighter, or whatever the ship is that he's on, we find out that his bad guy and crew of bad people, they're on the Exxon Valdez. Google Exxon Valdez, and you will see why, even in 1995, the audience was screaming with laughter when we realized, holy shit, this is the Exxon Valdez. Well, the Exxon Valdez, just in case you don't know, I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. They ran aground in the worst possible spot, and there was a horrible oil spill that fucked up wildlife, fucked up marine life, fucked up the land. It was awful. Oh, and it fucked up the environment. Okay, so this was not an accident that they just happened to have the Exxon Valdez. No. If we continue down this ridiculous path, we are going to end up with a world where the lands start to recede, and maybe there won't be any dry land, and it's one word. That's another thing I love. It's not dry space land, it's dry land, one word. So Dennis Hopper, he doesn't have as interesting a character as Howard Payne in Speed. And he is certainly not as interesting as maybe the single greatest villain performance in the history of movies, Frank Booth in Blue Velvet. He doesn't get to do any of the shtick from either of those films. You know, with Speed, do not attempt to grow a brain. He doesn't get to do that. And there are no moments, alas, I wish there were. I was rooting for it. There are no moments in this movie where Dennis Hopper, like one of the guys on his ship, looks at him, and then all of a sudden Dennis Hopper goes, "Don't you fucking look at me!" I was waiting for it. It doesn't happen, unfortunately. But the general thrust, the premise of the story, you can see why Costner wanted to make it. It was a chance to make a kind of practical effects action movie. And, you know, there are certain stars in Hollywood who, maybe because they're so damn likable and they have a good reputation. In the case of Costner, he was also a producer, TIG Productions for many years, produced Tin Cup, which was his next movie. But Costner had a lot of box office disappointments, and he was on the A-list for a really long time, longer than most. And that's where he has a little bit of a parallel with Bruce Willis, because Bruce Willis was involved in a lot of movies that fucking bombed. But he had enough diehards, and Fifth Element, Armageddon, Sixth Sense, that he stayed on the A-list. Well, Kevin Costner, the previous year, his previous film was Lawrence Kasdan's Wyatt Earp, a movie that I believe to be the superior film to George Cosmatos' legendary Tombstone, which, to be fair, does have an incredible Val Kilmer performance. But Wyatt Earp has an unbelievable Dennis Quaid performance. He could have easily gotten a Best Supporting Actor nomination. Dennis Quaid was 160 pounds before filming, and then he lost another 30. He actually looks like he's dying in the world of that film. So Costner was coming off Wyatt Earp, which bombed at the box office, in part because of the success of Tombstone. It's basically telling the same story, just 80 minutes longer. It's an epic version of Wyatt Earp, as opposed to just Tombstone, the Earps versus the Clanton gang. But Wyatt Earp bombed, and he needed something that he thought would get people into the seats, and Kevin Reynolds, they liked the script. So the idea was that both Costner and Reynolds liked the script, and it tells a story that has enough sense of mystery and menace and decent performances and a kind of narrative through line that, I mean, when you watch it now for the first time and you say to yourself, it doesn't look like it should have cost $200 million. That's real. That is a fair criticism. But again, it's on the studio. You have a story of, was it Tina Maiorina was the name of the actress, of a young girl. And then you have the Jeanne Tripplehorn character who kind of protects her. And then the mariner, and they're basically looking for dry land. But so is Dennis Hopper and his gang, you know, his sort of gang of lunatics. But I remember after seeing the film, my aunt was interested in seeing it. She hadn't seen it, but my dad and I, and I think my sister were telling, you know, this movie was pretty good. And there was one reference to James Cameron's Aliens. There's one reference, and it's magnificent, where there's a famous scene in Aliens where Sigourney Weaver, mild spoiler, is convinced that the character of Bishop has stranded them. And she screams, "Bishop, goddamn you." There's a sequence of shots in this movie that's almost identical to that. And I picked up on it. Most people probably didn't, but that's the sort of savant brain. But 1995, although there were a lot of fun, entertaining movies, I am confident in saying it's the weakest year of the best decade Hollywood ever had, the 1990s. And for the summer, I mean, Waterworld did okay if it had been the budget that it was supposed to have. So the way the action sequences are staged, I thought that Reynolds did a good job getting everybody into position. And and it's another one of those movies, it's tricky. We talked about with Star Trek II, where you have the dual over actors in William Shatner and Ricardo Montalban. Here, you have Kevin Costner playing the material very close to the vest. It's not a broad performance like he did with Clint in A Perfect World, which I think is probably the best performance Costner ever gave in a movie. Clint, I don't know how he got it out of him, but he did. But there's a lot of stuff where you have hero and villain, and they're not in the same area code. They're not in the same time zone. But the way the film progresses, it works. And the building of the kind of action sequences where it does feel like it builds, to a crescendo. And there is a sort of clearly defined beginning, middle, and end. And it's an interesting concept where you have, and another reason why this film, they said, was in trouble, because when they were showing some of the early to put together a trailer, Kevin Costner's character is not entirely human. He has a little bit of fish in him. And there was a shot of what looked like almost a plastic gill glued on. It looked so bad that people were like, well, this film is a fucking joke. What are they doing? In the world of the movie, it's good. It's good. But the concept that I did not consider as just a guy watching a movie at that particular time is, well, he looks like Kevin Costner. He looks like a human. But what if, let's just say, they reach dry land? Maybe the gill man, he can hang out on dry land, but he can't stay there. And this is something that's different. I mentioned Submariner, but Aquaman in particular, and I don't know the mechanics of Submariner in the MCU. I'm not up on that. But Aquaman, what's his name? Arthur Curry, I think is his name. Is Arthur Curry? But the Jason Momoa from the Justice League movies. I don't think the character of Aquaman is that exciting, but he can live, he can subsist, he can sustain himself on planet Earth. He might be the king of the underworld kingdom, but I don't think there's anything with him where he absolutely has to, or he'll become violently ill if he spends more than a couple of hours on land. This is what we get from Kevin Costner's character. And it's not really even a plot twist, but it's an angle that I didn't expect. And I think really adds to the feel of the film, that he wanted to get them to safety. He wasn't trying to get himself to a place where he would permanently be on dry land, because he needs the water. He actually needs to be at sea, not for the soul, but for his body chemistry. He can't stay on land indefinitely. So I don't know when exactly the sort of turn where people began to appreciate Waterworld, because if you go back to 95, 96 era and read articles from then, they all say the film is trash and it more or less bombed at the box office. But then at a certain point, as with Last Action Hero, it just began to shift, where people were saying, you know what, this movie is a lot better than advertised, a lot better than expected. And I remember being pleasantly surprised with the box office gross back then. They weren't going to make a sequel, but it made Costner look better, because that he was put through the ringer there. And also the director, Kevin Reynolds, he went on to do a film which is very, very controversial, although a lot of younger people have never heard of it, a movie with Samuel L. Jackson called 187. And that is a vicious spin on the inspirational teacher. It's like Dangerous Minds, but it's not like Dangerous Minds. It's in that ballpark, and it goes an entirely bonkers direction, just crazy. But Costner moved on from the presumed and assumed disappointment of Waterworld, and he did Tin Cup next. And I always talk about my dad being the biggest movie fan I ever knew, which is a true statement. My dad loved Tin Cup. Sorry, my cat is being a little bit rambunctious. I apologize. This is Sheldon. Say hi, Sheldon. He's so funny. But Tin Cup is a fantastic film. And it's a movie about a golfer. And obviously we're all talking about Happy Gilmore 2. I was not a fan of Happy Gilmore. I have no interest in seeing Happy Gilmore 2. The original was just okay. I know a lot of people who said it was funny, but the critical reception is just awful. And my guess is I wouldn't enjoy it. But Costner bouncing back from the perceived disappointment of Waterworld, making Tin Cup, a film which was a critical darling. People really liked it. And Kevin was one of the co-producers of the film through this company, as I mentioned, TIG Productions. And then he made another mistake and he did The Postman, which he directed and produced. And man, it came out right around the same time as Titanic. Not good, not good. And that was kind of I guess you could say almost the end of Costner being way, way up there on the A-list, but he still had box office hits. Message in a Bottle was okay, but I feel like that movie works mostly because of Paul Newman and Robin Wright, not so much Kevin Costner. But Waterworld is an interesting film to talk about because of the perception not being the reality. And in the case of Last Action Hero, it was a box office bomb. That's not make-believe. That film did not turn a profit. But the raw numbers say that the only problem with Waterworld was the cost overruns for just not shooting in the right area. And to me, it is a film, and I haven't heard Costner talk about it in interviews of late. Maybe, again, I'm not on top of everything, sorry. But it, to me, is a movie that he could be proud of. That he toughed it out, that GN Triplehorn and Tina Maiorino and Dennis Hopper, that they all figured out a way to get through this disastrous typhoon after typhoon, where just the idea that the set kept getting destroyed by the weather, like literally, it's not something that you would imagine, because normally you shoot in sound stages, you do what James Cameron did, and you're in a tub, you're in what amounts to an enormous swimming pool. They could have done that. And they decided to go for the, cinema verite verisimilitude of let's try to make this as realistic as possible. And they sure succeeded there, but at the cost of, another $50 to $75 million. But Waterworld, released on July 28th, 1995, a film that was thought to be a disaster and a box office bomb, was neither a box office bomb nor a disaster. It is a terrific action movie with science fiction elements and some really interesting stuff just below the surface. Again, the more you think about that ship being the Exxon Valdez, the funnier it gets, and the more kind of salient point I assume the filmmakers were trying to make. And a good movie. What I meant to say is it's streaming free on Peacock, and there are plenty of other services like Amazon Prime. You can rent it for $2 to $3. Well worth the watch. So a somewhat happy 30th anniversary to the release of the second collaboration between Kevin Reynolds and Kevin Costner, Waterworld. This has been episode 581 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Sunday evening here with me in New York. And if you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.